we go. So welcome, Christy, to the New Jersey Environmental Fundraisers Gathering. We welcome you, and the floor is yours to chat with the group.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Before I dive in and walk through some of what Lauren and I discussed would be helpful, I would just love to get to know you a little bit. So maybe share your name, what organization you're with, and maybe the thing you're most proud of that you're doing right now.
I can go first. My name is Karen Dorfer, and I do communications for the Musconetcong Watershed Association. And right now we're working on our 30th anniversary festival. So that's my biggest thing right now. I'm pretty excited to get that going. It should be later this month on the 29th. So it's coming up.
I bet your hands are very full.
Hats.
Hi, I'll stick with the Karen trend. I'm Karen Keene. I'm the Director of Development for Monmouth Conservation Foundation. I'm pretty new in this role. I just started a couple of months ago, part-time. And I'm really proud because I've been a fundraiser most of my career, but in this role, I'm tackling communications and doing a lot of things outside of my normal hat wearing, as many of us do in nonprofits.
Nice.
Go next, I guess. My name is Priyal Olshan, she, her. I'm with the New Jersey Highlands Coalition as the Director of Membership and Administration. And I'm working on getting all of our back-end stuff all cleaned up and pretty.
That is an important role. That takes a lot of time. Nice work.
I'll jump in. My name is Erica Kalachi. I'm the Assistant Development Director at the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I've been with that organization for 2.5 years, and we are just wrapping up our first in-person event first one we've had in 4 years. So I'm crunching the numbers and feeling pretty pleased about that. So.
Great.
Hi, I'm Amber Ray. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at the Land Conservancy of New Jersey. I'm new to the group. I'm new to the organization. I started at TLCNJ 3 months ago. And big thing that we just completed was our big annual fundraising event, the Grey Cup. So a big golf event, my first golf event. It was a lot of my first 3 months, but it was a great day. So excited for that. So now with that under my belt, I can focus on the program side of what we're doing here. So I'm very excited.
Thanks. Looks like Lori or Linda maybe are next in terms of introductions.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm Lori Cleveland. I'm the Executive Director of the Sauerland Conservancy. And if I caught the tail end of Amber's introduction correctly, I'm going to identify something that we're doing to raise funds. Is that correct?
That or something you're really proud of, or anything.
We're about to have our 17th Sauerland Mountain Fest on July 23rd, and we have not sold all our tickets yet, so we're behind schedule on that, and I'm really nervous about it, but we've got a lot going on, and I personally haven't been able to focus very much on it. We do have a very dedicated staff of volunteers who are handling that event, but we're getting down to the wire, and I'm starting to get a little bit nervous.
Oh, best of luck. That's always stressful, the tail end. Mm-hmm. And Linda, I'm not sure if you're able to jump in or not. It's okay if you aren't.
I am. I'm Linda Tower. I'm with the Ridge and Valley Conservancy, and right now I'm working on just coming off of a whole bunch of different workshops. I do a lot of not just the Director of Development, but I'm also the Director of Land. So I'm doing a lot of just coming off a lot of workshop content. And now I'm going to turn my attention to our walkathon this fall.
Exactly. Good. And Denise, you just jumped in. Hi, welcome. We're doing introductions. You can chime in or not. Lauren, did you share much about my background and why you decided to invite me to join?
No, I didn't.
Do you want to take a minute to do that before I dive in?
Unfortunately, Christy, I'm not feeling well, so I
That's
don't have the
okay.
capacity to think right now.
That is perfectly fine. You take care of yourself. I'll share just a little bit about our connections and then we can go from there. So Lauren and I have been in conversations for maybe six to 8 months or so. She's over the years attended a number of our webinars and seen us through a transition in terms of our company name and all that good stuff, but mentioned that you all are constantly busily at work trying to raise funds, and that legacy and planned giving is something that you often talk about but don't necessarily have a ton of capacity for. And so my hope is today to talk a bit about statistics and numbers and data and also practical low-hanging fruit sort of ways that you can bring this into the work that you're doing. My background is in planned giving. We as an organization do deep dive work with families and helping them think through the values that they have, the things that really matter to them, the life that they're creating. And then through that, we help them come up with strategic ways that they can achieve their goals. Usually giving as much as they can to families a part of that, but they're often charitably minded as well. And so we get to do a lot of educating around vehicles that are accessible and how to incorporate them, both in current giving, but also down the road when their testamentary plans go into effect. So that's a little bit about my background. I do a lot of presentations in different contexts. One thing I really love to make clear, and it's always easier, of course, in person, is I am very open to interruption. So feel free if you have a question or you have an idea or something doesn't make sense to just flag me down, interrupt me, or ask, of course, the question in the Q&A or the chat section. I want to make sure that this time is really valuable for you. Sound good? All right, so let me share my screen here and we will get started. All right, can everyone see that okay? Perfect. So we've already done introductions. So let me just walk you through kind of the different components we'll talk through. First is statistics. I think statistics are really helpful. I'm a bit of a data nerd when it comes to legacy, estate giving, typical mishaps or things that come up when someone is thinking about their estate and planning for it. We'll talk a bit about legacy and planned giving. We'll talk through some charitable vehicles, and then the daunting but fun donor stories and marketing that's a part of all of that. So without further ado, let's start by talking through some planned giving facts. So some of this might be familiar to you, some of this may not, but when it comes to estate planning, about 60% of Americans do not have a plan that's up to date. They don't have a plan that will achieve the things that they want, which means that the government, typically the state government, is going to make the decisions for someone. Of those that actually have a plan in place, so of the 40% of Americans or so that have something in place, about half of them really understand what their plan will do. And of those, about 8% of them are leaving a gift out of their estate to charity, which when we look at how much people tend to give year over year, 85% of Americans are charitable, which means we're incredibly generous year to year. But when we look at the full picture of what happens when we pass away, charity is only getting about 2 to 4% of Americans' testamentary gifts. And when we look at the assets that someone has, when we are asking for money, for support, when we're working on fundraising, we tend to be asking for people to give out of about 9% of their actual assets. About 91% of an average American's assets are buried. This is life insurance, this is retirement, the house, savings accounts, the things that really until someone passes away isn't readily available for them. And so what that means is we are missing the boat a bit in terms of some of the biggest gifts that someone could give, the most powerful ways that someone could give. And so that's really where my sweet spot is helping someone understand that. And from there, helping them come up with the most strategic and smart, planful way to do that. A couple of statistics that I find to be really interesting when it comes to an inheritance is how quickly it's spent. So we have what's called the rule of 18. This is a little interactive, so please chime in. So how long do you think it takes before someone spends their inheritance? This is about 85% of the time.
Since it's the rule of 18, is it 18 months?
18 months. Mm-hmm. So it takes about 18 months for someone to spend everything that they've received. Now, it's not always on bad things, right? It's not on frivolous things necessarily. It might be to pay off debt. It might be to pay for a mortgage, invest. But typically within 18 months, it's gone. It's been allocated. It's been spent. How long do you think it takes? And this is a little facetious, but how long do you think it takes before someone's in a new car showroom?
I'll guess 18 days.
It is about 18 days. And we, over the last 20 plus years, have these statistics aren't changing. So that's one thing that's fascinating. But over the last 20 years, we've had car salesmen in the room, or boat salesmen, RV salesmen, whatever, in the room when we are sharing this. And they will nod their head, raise their hand, and share a story. They can usually sell the highest end of vehicles to someone who has just received an inheritance. And why is that? It's funny, I shared this with my mom and she was like, yep, that's the first thing I intend to do when your dad passes away. So, which I was like, okay, duly noted. Dad, how do you feel about that? But the reason often behind the quick spending is, you know, when we receive that inheritance, we haven't worked our entire lives to you know, grow those funds. We haven't saved for retirement in the way that our parents have. Now, when it's our own dollars, we tend to be a lot more frugal. But when we get this sudden influx of money, it's a lot easier to spend it and to not think as much about the ramifications. And grief is, of course, a part of that as well. Now, here's one that is interesting. How long do you think it takes before someone is shopping online, Amazon, Target.com, whatever your favorite is?
18 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yes, or quicker. So again, statistics tell us that we just spend quickly. I know these statistics, and when my mother-in-law passed away 4 years ago, I found myself spending money. Now, we didn't even have an inheritance at the time, and that inheritance isn't mine. That's my husband's to choose how to use it. But when we're grieving, we make different choices. When we're grieving, we stay up late, we can't sleep, we try to fill that void. And oftentimes spending, especially in the consumeristic America that we live in, spending tends to be something that happens more quickly. And so when I work with families, when you work with families and you're talking about planned gifts, or you're talking about what's going to happen when you're no longer here, many people don't have a plan in place. And they don't understand some of these details. So one of my questions always is for you to think about, what plans do your supporters have for the assets they've accumulated? And are they going to be a good thing, or are they maybe not going to be a good thing? I know when I turned 18, which the government, if someone doesn't have a plan in place, the government's plan in pretty much every state is at age 18, if a minor child's parent passes, at age 18, they receive their full inheritance. Now, when I think about myself at age 18, though I was pretty responsible, I also know that I probably wouldn't have gone to college right away. I probably would have gone and traveled Europe because that was my fascination and passion. And I'm not saying my life would have been bad, but I am saying that I don't think I would have spent it very well. And so when we're helping families think about how they want to create a legacy, helping them understand how they can care for their kids or loved ones well, how they can help set them up well, is really important as well. So when it comes to planned giving, oftentimes we think of a gift that comes at the end of someone's life. Now, planned giving in my mind is actually something that we do and help someone set up during life. It's thoughtful planning today for a future date, which might be while someone, 10 years from now with a charitable gift annuity. It might be through utilizing and gifting a piece of property that they no longer have. But it also might be a part of someone's that final legacy or that capstone on their life. One thing, and again, diving a little bit more into statistics that I think is important, is often we focus on the current gifts or the major gifts or reaching those immediate goals that we have. And we're held to those goals for different reasons and in different ways. But when we think about planned gifts, ones that take more time, more strategy, the impact on your organization is so much more significant. So deferred gifts tend to be about 200 times the annual gifts that you receive from someone. So if someone is consistently giving $1,000 a year to your organization, if they strategically understand how to gift out of their estate, their gift tends to be 200 times that. So now instead of a $1,000 gift, you're getting this $20,000 or more gift. When someone chooses to remember your organization in their estate plan, or they've set up a planned gift and intend to gift that to you in 10, 15 years, hopefully while they're living, their consistent annual gifts increase by 65 to 75%. The reason behind that is now they're invested in the strategy of your organization. When someone chooses to remember you as a part of their long-term planning in a larger way than they currently are, they want to see continued growth. So they tend to give more, and that's a national statistic. Oftentimes we see an increase, a pretty significant increase in reaching endowment growth goals. And oftentimes the gifts from those that have chosen to leave a planned gift during a capital campaign, those gifts tend to be larger. So there are some really strong impacts on today's giving when someone remembers you in their legacy or creates a planned gift. So even if you don't have a ton of time to invest in this, beginning to think about how this works at your organization will have really significant impact down the road. So I, in my work, like to think about planned giving more as legacy planning. And I work at Apex Legacy Consultants, and so legacy clearly is a part of that. So let me just take a step back and talk a bit about legacy planning, because it's a bit more big picture. So legacy planning creates an opportunity to review someone's estate details, the situation they're currently in, and really understand the good and the bad, the things that are happening or could happen as a part of that plan. It's so much more than just legal documents. It's about thoughtful legacy engagement in the life someone's living, but also what they're leaving behind. It communicates values and ultimately transfers assets. And it gives someone an opportunity to pull together all of the different plans, wishes, values, key information as a part of their legacy planning experience. So it's the step back and helping to pull all those pieces together so that their loved ones are cared for, and hopefully the charities they love are cared for too. Oftentimes the benefits in taking that step back and beginning to put pieces into place are when they're listed here, but peace of mind is a huge one, providing for loved ones and protecting assets. Again, a lot of people don't know what will happen when they pass away. They just think it's going to go to my kids. They may not understand some of the tax implications or how different assets are transferred. And so this planning process can help someone slow down and begin to understand those pieces. It can help reduce estate-related costs. It can mitigate future disagreements. Because if we don't talk about our intentions with our loved ones, a lot of tension can be created as a part of that. I'm sure you all have stories or can reflect on experiences of your own or people you know. So again, creating a plan, thinking about it, and then communicating it really can impact impact families for the good. Two other benefits: identifying and naming trusted individuals. Again, if you don't name them, if your donors don't name them, the government will help to figure that out. And sometimes people we wouldn't maybe choose to put in place are put in place. And then avoiding paying unnecessary taxes. And I'll show you some illustrations that I think could be helpful, probably for your own planning, but also for your donors' planning as well. So then how does legacy planning and plan giving merge? Well, legacy planning can incorporate charitable giving, and oftentimes the best way to minimize tax in someone's estate, even if they don't have a federally taxable estate, is by using charitable vehicles. And so this is a way that even the non-charitably minded individuals I work with see benefit. It explores opportunities that people often believe are beyond their capabilities. You don't have to be a multi-billionaire to leave a significant gift to charity, and the planning can begin today. So some misconceptions I hear all the time, you probably have heard these from some of the families you work with. One is that plan giving is only for people with a lot of money. And in our 20 years of work, we have had one person who had too much debt to be able to create a planned gift. And we've worked with hundreds of thousands of families. So anyone can do it. And it doesn't have to take, their entire estate to make that happen. Another misconception is that it'll take money away from children and grandchildren. Now, a really solid planning process is going to keep in mind those values of someone. And so I'm seeing heads nod. You all know this, right? Like, you're not intending to take money away from their loved ones, but you do know that your organization matters to them. And so it can be a both and. It doesn't have to be an either or. I'll be pressured to give more than I want to. Again, when we keep the family first and foremost as the priority, their values, the things that matter to them, then the pressure valve can be released. And it can really be about them and their goals and their vision. And then the last thing is that I already have a will or a trust, so I don't need this. I have a plan in place. Ironically, most of the families that I've met with that have come in saying this often realize that they weren't taught all the options that exist, and so tend to find new or more creative ways to accomplish their goals and give usually more to charity and sometimes more to their kids as well. So some misconceptions. Are there other things that you have heard from donors you've worked with about planned giving? Pushback, negative feedback? Awesome. All right, we'll keep thinking. All right, so let's see here. So let's talk a bit about charitable vehicles. So I'm saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible. I'm saying your donors all can do something. So what are some things that you might be able to use? So I like to break planned gift types into categories. Immediate benefit, which is often what we're trying to do in our fundraising. So annual gifts, direct gifts, maybe endowment funds, using those for different things, donor advised funds, non-cash gifts, charitable lead trusts, where they pay the charity first, family later, qualified charitable distributions, and then future benefit gifts. These might be bequests, charitable gift annuities, charitable remainder trusts, pooled income funds, life estate, beneficiary designations. All of these are ways that someone can strategically and intentionally give to you. And there are likely more, but these are the most common. I like to break it down and simplify just a little bit and talk through some of the low-hanging fruit, the things that you might be able to do now that are types of planned gifts that could really, really impact your organization, either today in terms of giving or down the road in terms of larger gifts coming your way. So we'll talk through donor advised funds, qualified charitable distributions, non-cash gifts, and proactive legacy planning. So donor advised funds, and for those of you that are really familiar with these, awesome. For those of you that are loosely familiar with these, great. And for those that have no idea, hopefully I'll give you a little insight. So donor advised funds are continuing to grow in popularity, especially among millennials. We've seen just giving to them skyrocket, and then giving out of them skyrocket as well. So the average grant size over the last 10 years has increased over 1,000, and that's just one single grant. So we're seeing more and more giving take place out of them. Payout rates are surpassing private foundations, almost 3 to 1. So donor advised fund giving, when someone gifts out of it each year, they tend to gift about 22% of the principal. Private foundations are giving about 5%. So this is a really great way for average families to give significantly. And then 60% of the gifts go to areas of greatest need. So you being able to create a compelling reason for someone that creates urgency and showcases immediate need is going to be really important to receiving funds from donor advised funds. So some of the benefits to you, the nonprofit, and talking about them and seeking them out and talking with donors about them are here. So the first is donors are already receptive. If they have a donor advised fund in place, they're receptive to giving. They naturally are building that into their planning. There's potential for predictable cash streams. So often people will set up regular giving, whether it's annual gifts or monthly gifts, right out of their donor advised fund. They don't have to think about it. Easy to make happen. They are easy to establish for someone. They don't usually cost or require much of someone. So they could have a relatively modest estate or consistent income, and this is still a way for them to give regularly. It's an opportunity for you to communicate with donors on a regular basis. Repeat gifts often come from these. And you get to acknowledge the gift, but you don't have to receipt it. So it simplifies your tracking just a little bit on the back end. Electronic fund transfers tend to persist, and donor advised fund hosts might be able to handle those complex gifts. So if someone wanted to transfer property to your organization, but you don't necessarily receive or accept that, or it would take you a lot of time and effort to make happen, oftentimes those donor advised fund hosts can help do that. So it becomes a really easy mechanism for someone to transfer cash and other assets to you. And then the benefits to donors. All charitable dollars are in one place if they're using it in a consistent way. So that's really, really helpful and advantageous to a lot of families. There's flexibility in timing, so they can choose to give regularly or not. They can make it anonymous, which some people really like. I have several friends who prefer to do their giving anonymously. Of course, there's growth of charitable dollars, just like we see in most years in the stock market. This year's not been as great. Testamentary planning and succession planning are all a part of it. And the other piece that I'll just mention is once your donors pass away, or as they're utilizing their donor advised fund, they, just like their estate, get to set up beneficiaries. And so that donor advised fund, whatever funds are left in it when they pass away, they also get to set up a plan for that. So if any of your donors are gifting out of these, talking with them about, did they set that plan up? What organizations are receiving a gift at the end? Who's the successor advisor? Could give you an opportunity to receive something, maybe in a larger lump sum, from that donor advised fund when they do pass away. So it can be a mechanism for a larger gift down the road as well. And I talk with a lot of families about utilizing donor advised funds within their estate planning process. So it can be a really great mechanism for transferring assets. They don't have to update their estate plan documents as often. And they can choose to leave, maybe they give 50% of their bequested donor advised fund to their favorite nonprofits, but they also get to allow their kids or grandkids to gift as well, teaching generosity to that next generation. So it can be a really great vehicle on that front. I'm covering a lot of ground here, so please forgive me for just running quickly through this. Again, chime in if you have more questions. So some immediate next steps, increasing your marketing around donor advised funds. This can be more passive than it needs to be active, but share your compelling vision, a vision of what you'll be able to accomplish if X number of dollars come in. Talking about a culture of generosity, identifying individuals who have given through a donor advised fund, acknowledging them, sharing story about what worked, using their story to talk about why donor advised funds are great vehicles. If you have any any donors that, and this gets at the educating your donors, but donors that have unique types of business. So I know someone who has a tree farm, and there are years where their farm brings in a ton of extra money and they have to figure out offsetting taxes that year. But maybe they have years where they don't get as much because it's a year with a drought, or their trees are just a little too young to actually harvest and sell. So those are years where they maybe don't have as much excess to give. So they use a donor advised fund to help mitigate tax year after year, and to make sure their giving is consistent even when they have those dips in their tree sales. So for you, when you're thinking about the families that are part of your donor pool, for those that have those unique lines of business where there are those kind of crazy influxes of cash, a donor advised fund could be really smart for them and a really creative way for them to minimize tax and keep their giving going. Speaking about the benefits with them, incorporating donor advised funds into conversations, just making it a part of, hey, we're looking for this type of gift. You can gift out of your donor advised fund if you have one. You can gift out of cash. We accept stocks, whatever those things are, just making it a part of your conversations. Donors should know that any 501c3 can be remembered through or gifted to through their donor advised fund. But if you're not talking about it, it may not be as top of mind for them. And then simplify the process. So talk about how to gift to you, make sure that you have any key tax information, data, numbers available for them. Questions about donor advised funds? All right. Qualified charitable distributions, or the IRA charitable rollover. Is this something that you all are familiar with? I see some heads nodding, some not. Okay, well, let's again dig into this. So this is one of the biggest and maybe worst kept secrets out there when it comes to giving to charity. So anyone that is over the age of 70 and a half can direct funds from their IRA to a qualified public charitable organization. So what that means is they can gift pre-tax to the organizations that they love. So they basically can give more to your charity, or they at least don't have to give as much to the government. Now, the donor needs to work closely with the custodian of the IRA to name the charity, have that check issued to the charity's name. If they receive the check written to them, it is no longer considered a qualified charitable distribution. So they would have to pay taxes. So it's important that directly from the IRA, it goes to your charity. The rollover is not done by naming the charitable organization as a beneficiary. That's something to make sure is clear with your donors. And oftentimes it's not automatically renewed. And so unless they talk specifically with their custodian, they would have to let them know the next year, hey, I intend to remember this charity at $10,000. A donor can gift once they turn 72. Everyone is required, at least as of today, based on current legislation. If someone has an IRA, they're required at 72 and older to take a required minimum distribution, or an RMD. A donor can choose to gift out of their IRA toward that RMD to charity. So again, that will decrease their taxable income and allow them to potentially give more to charity. Couple things to know: someone is limited to $100,000 in giving. So if there's a married couple, John can gift $100,000 out of his IRA, and Susie can give $100,000 out of her IRA, but they have to be their own separate IRAs. But someone could, if they have a sizable IRA, gift up to $200,000 to charity out of their individual IRAs. I have definitely seen organizations talk with donors about this, teaching them, educating them, and then receiving commitments from donors out of their IRAs. So it can be a way to take pledges and move those forward year over year. So just high level, if someone typically gives you $10,000 a year, if they were to gift directly out of their IRA, they would save on average, and this is kind of across the board, about 33% in taxes. Now, of course, it has to do with their own tax brackets, but when we look at these types of gifts, it ends up being about 33%. So they would be saving, if they just gave the $10,000 out of their IRA instead of out of their checking account, they could gift or save about $3,300 in taxes. Now, most people love that idea. Only once in our history have we actually had someone say, but that's the government's, we should pay them. Usually people would say like, hey, this is way better. I'd rather the nonprofit receive this gift than the government. So benefits for the nonprofit, for you, this can be current gifts, and it can be given year over year over year. And so it can make just a huge impact to your bottom line. Donor demographics. So we are seeing just an increase in those 70 and older. About, I think, what do they say? Is it 10,000 baby boomers are turning 70 every day in America right now? 10,000. That's a lot of people. So teaching even 65-year-olds and older that this exists, that this is an option for them, will help shift the culture of giving. It's a mutual benefit to the donor and nonprofit. Donors get to see a tax decrease. Nonprofits can sometimes see an increase in giving, and it can help you meet end of year goals. So RMDs have to be taken by the end of the year. So any donor that's in that age bracket, if they've not taken their RMD, this is a quick and easy way for them to take it, not see the tax hit, and see you receive those end of year gifts. Of course, there are benefits to donors as well. The qualified charitable distribution is excluded from their gross income, making it non-taxable. It's not subject to tax withholding. So there's a lot of funky rules around Social Security and Medicare, which is unfortunate, but this actually can help with some of those components. So it reduces Medicare premiums. So if someone is basically, this is a lot of detail. Really what you need to know is that by someone gifting out of their IRA, they can see a decrease in their Social Security income and of course taxes, and they can see a decrease in their premiums for their Medicare. So something for you to know, something for you to share. And then of course it does eliminate a two-step process in taking a taxable withdrawal. So instead of them having to pull the money and then gift it to you, they can just direct it and they sidestep one of those steps. But definitely some major benefits to donors that fall in that 70 and a half and older category. So some immediate next steps for you: increase marketing on this. Every supporter over the age of 70 could receive information from you about how to make these types of gifts. Make it a regular part of your communication, increase marketing. Maybe there's an e-newsletter, update this information on your website, include it in your email signatures, or send out something directly to those in your donor pool that are 65, 70 and older. Follow up with them. And you don't have to send a receipt when someone gifts out of their IRA, but I highly recommend that you send a thank you of some sort. Something to also note when it comes to marketing: it is helpful to market, of course, to those that are being impacted by this, so 65, 70-plus-year-olds. But many of us have parents or family members who are in that age category anyway. And so it can be wise to even market to those that are a little bit younger. Maybe they're in their 40s and 50s, and you can let them know that this exists, and they can share it with their parents or grandparents or whoever they know that's in that age bracket. Include this type of language in year-end marketing. That's an easy way for folks to gift at the end of the year. And again, it doesn't impact their checking account. Educate your donors, become an expert, attend seminars, attend any sort of plan giving councils that are nearby or national councils. Make sure that you're up to date on this type of information so that you can communicate about it wisely. And then simplify the process for this. Make sure there's easy routes for donors to notify you that gifts are coming from their IRA. Communicate that as broadly as you can. If someone needs assistance or they're not sure how to take these steps, if you have the time and the capacity to help walk them through it the first time, I can guarantee you'll see future gifts come from them through this mechanism. So it oftentimes is worth taking that extra step in time. Questions about qualified charitable distributions? I know I'm covering a lot of ground here. All right, so non-cash gifts, I'm just gonna do a quick high level of this one. So again, oftentimes when we are raising funds and raising support, we're talking about cash gifts, checks that we receive from someone or a direct payment online. But there are a lot of ways for donors to gift assets that maybe if they sold them today or they traded in some of their stocks, they would see an impact to, again, their taxes. Or these are assets that are just easier to give away than maybe their cash is today. So real estate's a big one. Charitable life insurance is something that some donors are capable of setting up. Farm assets or business assets, retained life and estate. That's where someone says, hey, I'm gonna live in my house until I pass away, but when I pass away, my house is yours. Of course, they need to make it more formal than that, but that's an easy way for someone who maybe doesn't have family members that want the home, or it's a way for them to gift a more substantial gift to your organization. Virtual currencies such as Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all of those types of things we're seeing more of. Privately held stock and retirement assets. Now, these types of gifts, you may not be equipped to receive and to manage the transaction itself. There are tons of organizations out there that either specialize in one of these types of gifts or a lot of these types of gifts. Community foundations can be a great help. Fidelity, Vanguard, some of those larger organizations can be a great one, especially in using the donor advised funds. But again, these are things to talk about because often donors aren't thinking strategically about how to gift unless they have significant means. Oftentimes they're thinking about what's in that 9% that we talked about earlier. And so teaching them and showing them that there are other ways to give just gives them more opportunities to give to you. And then the last big thing I want to talk about when it comes to kind of low-hanging fruit or things to talk about with your donors is what I like to think of as proactive legacy planning. I think I've mentioned this a bit. Most common family goals are give as much as they can to children and loved ones, minimize taxes, remember favorite nonprofits if it doesn't impact the family too much, and avoid arguments. Those are the biggest things I hear in my meetings with families. There are 4 really accessible testamentary charitable vehicles that I would recommend being well versed in and understanding how they work. Bequests, beneficiary designations, donor advised funds, and charitable trusts. So I'm going to just walk you through a couple illustrations here so you can kind of begin to visualize what is possible. So this is what I call our traditional I love you plan. So John and Jane Doe, they have a $1 million estate, they're average, I would say, in terms of what their estate is worth. And their plan is, just like most people, give everything to my spouse when I pass away, and then after that, give everything to our kids. So in their estate, they have 2 different categories of money, and this may be something you really know or something that's new to you. So everyone has, or most people have, what is called a non-qualified category of assets and a qualified category of assets. The non-qualified, or in this illustration, what's called the balance of the estate, these are assets that transfer tax-free. So John and Jane Doe don't have a taxable estate, but they do have some assets that are taxable. So the balance of the estate, or those non-qualified assets, would be your life insurance, your house, might be your savings accounts, your car, pretty much anything that you've purchased or paid for with post-tax dollars. That, with current legislation, goes tax-free to heirs. But most of us have qualified assets, or things that we have put in pre-tax where the government hasn't received their fair share yet. And this would be IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, some annuities, some pensions. And when you or your donors take these dollars out at retirement, they'll get taxed. And when those pass to the next generation as someone's inheritance, those are taxed. And that's where we tend to see a more significant tax being pulled out than people really understand. So if in this scenario, John and Jane Doe have 400,000 in their qualified assets in their IRAs and 401ks, most kids, if we remember back to that rule of 18, are going to take that money out within 18 months. If that's the case, if let's say John and Jane Doe have 2 kids, they each are going to get 200,000 of this and they take it out that first year, it'll be taxed likely at a higher tax rate because this is income above and beyond what they're already making. So typically we see the taxable amount here at 40 to 50%. Well, that's a pretty big chunk of change. It's about 160,000 of those qualified dollars. So kids are still getting over 800,000. It's still a huge gift from mom and dad, but there's nothing in there for charity, even though John and Jane Doe are incredibly charitable, and the government's getting a pretty big chunk of money. So I had a donor rename this the I Think I Love You plan when they saw the next illustration. And so this is where we as an organization and you can talk with your donors about options. So it's really wise to do this slowly, as you I'm sure know. People don't always understand all these different terms, but what I'd recommend talking with them about are 2 different vehicles that can be a part of your estate. So one is a bequest, and you could actually set up a bequest as a donor advised fund or as a beneficiary designation, and they essentially do the same thing. Essentially, when John and Jane Doe both pass away, a bequest or the other 2 would go directly to charity when they pass away. So if John and Jane Doe set up a 5% bequest, that's $50,000. My guess is if this is the size of their estate, they've never been able to make a one-time gift of $50,000 before. That was never an option. So that right there, when you show someone what they can do, that's a big deal, right? That's exciting. Most families just never dreamt that it was possible. So in this estate, the $1 million estate, we don't touch the non-qualified or the balance. That's going to go directly to kids. We take a 5% bequest out, so charity gets something right away. And then we utilize something called a charitable remainder unit trust. And we fund it with whatever is left of those qualified dollars. So if they have 400,000, they peel the bequest out of those first because they go tax-free. So win-win for everyone. The 350,000 then goes into the charitable trust. Charitable trusts are designed to pay out twice. They pay out first as a stream of income to charity, or excuse me, to heirs. So they typically pay out a minimum of 5% a year up to 20 years. If the kids are older, you might be able to set up a lifetime trust for the heirs, but for the most practical and most consistent, I would say 20 years is a good time frame. So 5 times 20 is 100, right? So whatever they funded this trust with, if they're paying out 5% a year, they do it over 20 years, they get to give 100% of those funding dollars to their heirs. Now it is taxable, but it's coming out in a lot smaller chunks. So the taxes tend to be at a lower rate. What's really great about these tools is that the charitable trust is invested. If we look at the history of charitable trusts, they tend to grow 6 to 7% a year. So if we're only peeling out 5% a year to give to the heirs, that funding amount isn't really being touched, and it's actually growing a little bit year over year. So kids or grandkids, whoever they've named as the beneficiaries, will receive that 5% of whatever's in that fund year after year. So technically, if that fund is growing the original amount, kids get a little bit more year over year as well. So instead of just getting the 350, I set this illustration at 5.8% growth. So it's relatively conservative. In this illustration, kids would actually get $381,000. So more than the original funding amount. Taxes are less by about $65,000. And at the end of those 20 years, whatever's left in the fund, in the charitable trust, gets to go to charity. So with all of the growth over those 20 years, there's about $417,000 left. So Kids get everything once, plus that immediate gift. Charity gets an immediate gift that's smaller and the substantial gift at the end. So now they're transferring 1.3 million. Kids are getting more than they were in that first I Love You plan illustration, and charity's getting almost $500,000. Now, these types of gifts are long-term gifts, right? They're not necessarily impacting your bottom line today as a nonprofit. But if you had one of these gifts come in every year, you would see a huge shift in what your organization can do. So beginning conversations around planned gifts and testamentary giving doesn't have to take away from anyone. It can actually enhance giving to kids. And it, of course, can make these huge differences on your own nonprofit and the communities around. So most of the time I see someone, when they're giving to charity, they're remembering 3 to 5 nonprofits on average. So your organization, if this was a donor of yours, you might get 25% of what's coming in, but again, that's over $100,000. So things to know, things to understand, and things to be able to teach families that this isn't really about just you. This is about them and setting something up in a way that really maximizes all of their giving. That's a lot of information I just shared. Pause, any questions? All right.
I do. I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you. This is so helpful and really interesting, and you're very good at explaining these complex concepts. What I'm curious about is when you're referencing sharing this information sort of in a sit-down setting with a family. So that obviously means you've established a really positive relationship up until that point to get them to even sit down with you. And I'm just curious about understanding different options and strategies around getting to that point, because that's, in my opinion, it's like getting them to the table is half the battle. And this is such uncomfortable stuff for any family to talk about. I'm just envisioning my own family and like, I don't know how I would even get my parents to, you know what I mean? Like this is tricky, psychologically triggering stuff. So do you mail information with a deeper dive with some of these scenarios to people ever, or are there any other strategies that you could share around putting people into their comfort zone to get to that meeting?
Yeah, definitely. You're hitting on the biggest challenge there is around these bigger concepts or bigger strategies. So one thing is I would just become more comfortable talking about these. So having information about this, including this on your Ways to Give page on your website. So make it a more accessible and regular part of the language. And I think a part of why we have chosen the word legacy planning is legacy speaks, it's a different word, right? It speaks to the heart, it speaks to the history, and we're all creating one, whether we know it or not, whether we're intentional or not, we're all creating a legacy. And so using that as a word to start conversations can really be helpful. I find that most of the organizations that we work with that are having these conversations, they're going at it from a couple different places. The first is they're talking about generosity about the family. They're talking about stewardship for the family, and they're not making it about themselves. They're shifting the conversation to say, hey, you've been a consistent giver here, or you consistently volunteered, or whatever their connection has been to your organization. And they start the conversation by saying, I can tell that you've lived an intentional life. I can tell that these things really matter to you. And then they name the awkwardness and say, you know, I know that this conversation is probably uncomfortable. I'm just going to put it out there, but I care about you and I care about what you're doing for your family. And so my question for you is, have you thought about your plan? Do you have something in place? And if you don't, I would encourage you to do that And two, there are smart ways to do it and ways to accomplish more of what I've seen in you. So it's still very conversational, Amanda. It's still very much about relationship. But the more you can turn it into a conversation about them and their legacy and their values and their family, the less the conversation is about you trying to take money from them. And it becomes a lot more about you're creating a legacy. I would love to help you think about how to do that well. If you remember us, great. If you don't, great. Either way, you matter, your legacy matters. And that's a really different conversation. It can be really disarming. So my philosophy is heavy on the relational side. I know that's not always the strategy for everyone, which is why I would say, you know, having information in a more passive format can be really helpful. I think the other thing is telling the story of donors that have chosen to remember your organization and sharing stories of average families. It can be really encouraging and fun to see the families with family foundations or other things that are doing really cool things. But often that doesn't feel accessible to most of our donors. Usually they need to see a little bit of themselves, even younger individuals in that place, talking about it, sharing their story and sharing the why behind it. And that it's not as scary as it needs to be or can be. And that this is the best way for us to love our loved ones is by putting something into place and making sure that it communicates all the parts of who we are. I don't know if that answered your question at all, Amanda.
No, it's great. I appreciate it. There's sort of no answer to the question in a way, you know, like it's just strategies and things that you've experimented with some success. So thank you very much. I guess my one follow-up question is, do you ever set up experiences with donors and financial professionals to talk more about these strategies, or is that the role that your organization plays in terms of providing that technical expertise?
Yeah, awesome question. So yes, and yes to both sides of things. So yes, you know, as a nonprofit, setting up space where there are other experts in the room to talk about the importance of this and talk about strategies can be really helpful. One of the things that I have found, and this is a really tricky space, a lot of advisors are less familiar with the charitable vehicle side of things. So they really understand how to grow someone's wealth if they're a financial advisor. They really know how to set a plan up in place for their clients when it comes to their estate plan. But integrating all of these pieces tends to be a space where us in the fundraising realm are more of the experts, and they're a little bit less of. So absolutely inviting professionals in the room is important. Bringing ones into the room that understand charitable vehicles and how they work and the power of them is, I would say, equally, if not more important. And yes, that is a space that we sit in. I sometimes explain our organization as being as looking at someone's life as a Venn diagram and all the different parts of who they are, their professional advisors, the things they're passionate about, their kids, their family, all of that. And what we get to do is sit in the middle with that family and help them look at those pieces and come up with a plan that touches on all the different components of it, and then sending them back to their attorney to draft documents, to an insurance agent to get more life insurance, to whomever it is that needs to pull those pieces together. So that's a specialty of ours, is to kind of sit in the middle and understand charitable vehicles in light of estate plans and in light of all these other areas. But we're not the only ones that do that, of course.
Christy, to Amanda's point, I have found that tricky in my career where until now I've worked in much larger organizations. I've been part of universities where we have a whole team. So once it was my job to kind of prime the pump and bring up the plan giving conversation and then pass it to my plan giving team. And I know even now, being in a small nonprofit, that we can never advise people. We have to be very careful. We have to put the disclaimer. So I still struggle with that, in having a conversation, that if I get somebody excited, especially an ordinary family, more of like not a sophisticated philanthropist who's used to this, who has advisors, the people that don't have advisors. It's hard because I feel like we have the conversation, they're excited. And then I say, wonderful, you should talk to your attorney or to your financial advisor. And if they don't have them, even if you refer them, I still feel like I'm just sending them off into the abyss. And it's hard to follow up because I can't give them advice. It's very complicated. So I've always struggled with plan giving in that regard, you know?
Yeah. Karen, you're not alone. I do hear that a lot. So our company, just so everyone kind of knows, so we partner typically with mid to small size nonprofits and serve as kind of their plan giving arm. Our approach tends to be the most effective approach, tends to be one that's more proactive. So one that offers this comprehensive program to the donors, and the conversation gets to look different because it's a gift to, and it's about them and all of that. And then we help them proactively think about different strategies. But we do also, Karen, to your point, serve as kind of that, okay, who do we send someone to when they've said they're curious? Then we can be that person that helps them think through those components before they go to an attorney. And if they don't have an attorney, we do vetting to help them find an attorney in their area. So we could be a good partner, Karen, to some of what you're needing, if you know that plan giving conversation does come up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know we've gone over a little bit on time, and there's a million other things that I could have covered. So I hope that everyone found this to be of at least somewhat value. Lauren, would it be helpful for me to send out my slides after this and some contact information? Yeah.
Yeah, please send me the slides and I'll forward them on along with the recording.
Awesome. I can do that. If any of you has additional questions, or you're like, Christy, that made no sense to me, could we talk through it again? I'm happy to jump on a call with you. Like I said, I know we covered a ton of ground, but plan giving doesn't have to be scary. It's something that is, I think, more top of mind than it has been in the past. So we're in a unique space with donors, whether it's, you know, COVID has not been fun or great by any means, but it has been helpful in stirring up conversation about legacy and end of life and some of those things. And so between that and this huge shift in our demographics and those that are over 70 years old in our communities, there is space for you to start these conversations. So if I can help in any way, I would love to be a support.
Thank you so much, Christy. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Christy before we end the session?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Well, enjoy your afternoons.
Thank you. Same to you. It was really
Thank
helpful.
you.